Alright, it's Murray Lorden here from MUZBOZ Games, and I'm just having a look through this project that I made called B-Grade Renegade, Race to the Rocket. It started off just being called Foxy Driver. I made it in Game Salad, which is an engine that I used for many years, from about 2011 to 2018. Here's all the actors. This was actually the very first game I started, I think. And I will actually do a time lapse of a bunch of old builds showing it stepping through the various 7,500 versions of the file that I have. It started off just as a top-down sort of orange car on a landscape zooming around to what it ended up being. I'll just press play now and start to have a bit of a look at it, but I'll talk about the systems in the game and how it was made, and maybe I'll turn off the mobile version because it'll keep trying to do platform things. Okay, we'll have a quick look at the mobile version and then I might turn it off. So when it starts up, there's booster crates because there's in-app purchases in the mobile version, which was originally designed for iPad, and they let you sort of get these power-ups. Now, you don't need to use them at all to play the game, but you can buy them and use them. You start off with one, so we can use it now. We got some fuel, some money, and a rocket launcher, so you can get different weapons in the crates. We're starting off, and you've got to make it 1,200 miles to get across the country to get on the last rocket before the world blows up. Now the radio's probably ticking away here with some intro dialogue by Brendan Barnett, a good voice acting friend of mine who I like to work with because he's a genius. You can turn that off so you don't have to hear it, but there's lots of funny little radio snippets every time you come back to the menu. So we're trying to make it across the country before this last rocket takes off, because the world's going to blow up because the humans have ruined the place. So we want a car. This one pays $165 for this mission. This one pays $90, and they both only go 10 miles. But once we've got a car, we get a travel bonus. So let's go this one. And the job is to destroy all the infested buildings. So all of the levels are randomly generated based on parameters that I feed in based on the zone you're in, and all of the actual mission, like the range of missions available on the menu, each sort of at each map point you end up at, are also randomized. So it's very randomized. It's kind of a roguelite, I suppose. I like sort of roguelike elements. It means that it's just always different every time you play. I never know where anything's going to be in terms of crates or targets, like the houses to blow up. These are spawners that spawn out these monsters. A lot of the monsters are voiced by my friend Brendan. Some of them are voiced by Prani as well. We'll have a look at the credits later. So in these missions, you've just got to blow up. Your objective's always up here, so you've just got to blow up 5 spawners. All of the spawners. You're effectively clearing the area for the people still sort of living here and whatnot. So I believe we picked up that car. You have to get in a car to own it, and then you own that car. Now let's have a look. Oh, and then in you can buy the classic cars pack in this mobile version as well. You can get it on iOS and Android, but on the Mac version this stuff's all built in. There's no booster crates, and you just get all the cars to begin with. Damn it, I didn't even get in the car. So you can buy these cool cars for like $1 or $2 or something. Let's close this. And yes, so you have to make it all the way across. There's 6 zones, but these missions are always randomized, and so there'll be different objectives, different perks, and a different sort of distance traveled. And if you've got a car, these are all doubled for that turn. So it's effectively like kind of an FTL type of a game, or you know, you've got to make it there in a time limit, and making choices about, oh, I'm low on health, I might try to go to a shop, or you know, these crates levels. There's said to be supply crates in these parts. There'll be health there more commonly than these levels. Get a car, you need a car, so pick a car mission. Let's have a look at the project. Then we'll jump back into the game for a bit. So I've actually got there's tons of attributes in here. These are global attributes, so things about like the car velocity, wind conditions for the missions, blah 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 blah. So I can go desktop version. Let's turn it on, and that'll get rid of the in-app purchases and also hide the D-pads and things. Let's just have a look. Basically, it's actually kind of a simple game in that, in terms of the scenes, sorry, they're tables. There's tables of weapons, characters, vehicles, missions, which didn't really end up getting used. I had handmade missions, but I ended up just using 3 rows of the table to generate mission values into, which is quite massive amount of variables. And then depending on which one of the 3 the player chooses, it just builds the mission using one of the rows, the row they chose. There's a shops table. These would be better to look at in Excel. Let's have a look at some of these. So here's a shops table. In here, we've got the different guns, what they'll be called on screen, and this is the description you see in the shop. This is whether you own it, and I actually write over this table for the player, so it writes in here owned if you own it, and then they become available to select as weapons in the game. There's various images. This is the likelihood of them appearing in each shop. So in shops in zone 1, this is the percentage chance that you'll see a rifle or bazookas, etc. And if you own it, then you'll see the ammo in the shop instead of the gun itself, and the gun has a price and the ammo has a price. What else have we got? Let's close that down. There's the costs and things. Let's bring this over here. So we've got characters, and this is all of the monsters. So you've got slow zombie, fast zombie, zombie deer, minions, baby spiders, overlords. These are different soldiers with different weapons, which are basically the weapons you have yourself. There's the Wastelander, who's kind of this punk Mad Maxy sort of bit of a homage to old bad 80s sci-fi movies. Crawling eyeball, giant ant. There's a sort of a tank and a hover drone and a cultist. And so these have different speeds and health points. Some of them are actually side on and some of them are top down, partly just due to how long I was making the game. I had a few different styles of art and stuff, but they kind of go okay together. Width and height. So there's actually only one actor in the game for enemies, which is the eyeball, the monster actor. And when they load in, this is just the one actor that's every single monster in the game, because basically they have the same set of possible behaviors, like moving, doing ranged attacks, blah 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 blah, but they take their data from the table and decide what the image is going to be for them, what their movement speed is, their health, and also what moves are available to them. So you can see in here they've got different different susceptibility to fire damage, different car damage, although I think most of them are set on 20. Damage from explosions. Some of them are more susceptible to fire than others. XP value actually ended up just being bonus money you get, so it's sort of more of a bonus money value. Oh, actually, maybe I didn't use that, and you get, that's the credits value there. Now this is a very important bit of it, where there's 4 ranges for their AI, and basically if they are out of range of the player, and that's actually a number I define in this table as well as to what distance these are defined by. If they're out of range, they'll search or chase for you. And if they're at far range, they'll have different behaviors. So some enemies might have a ranged shooting attack. So if they're at far range, they'll shoot from far range. Whereas these guys, you can see, will shoot from close range. And this is melee range, which is basically if they're right near you. These have a melee attack. These guys will move to close range if they're at melee range, so they don't want to be close to you. So that's like all the soldiers, for example. They want to move back and then shoot. And then these guys have rifles and bazookas and stuff. They even want to move further back to far range, and then they'll shoot. So they've got a sort of an update loop where, based on the distance to you, they'll have a sort of a prerogative, which might be to move to a different range, or to shoot or chase or search for the player. They'll also search for you if you hide in the trees, which makes you, if you're basically outside of their perception ability. I think this is when they're wandering. I can't quite remember what I did with that now. I think if they can't find you anymore, they'll sort of wander around, and they have a sort of a random shape. They'll look for another point to wander to, and then they'll wander. There's a chance they'll spawn pickups, although they have different ones each. And there's a chance they'll spawn cash, and a chance they'll spawn ammo. This is their sense distance, so that's what defines their maximum range. There's their projectile damage they'll do to you. That's what their bullet will look like. That's the size of their bullets. This is how accurate their aiming is, so how much noise is added to, instead of shooting perfectly at you, they'll add this sort of XY noise. That's their bullet range, that's their bullet speed. The bullet will disappear after that range. This is whether their bullet expands or not, so sometimes they'll shoot something that gets bigger over time, like the shotgun guy. The shotgun blast will sort of expand the further it goes. These guys have explosive projectiles. And that's the delay between shots fired, so their sort of rate of fire. And there's their base image, which just sets it to that quickly when they first spawn, because otherwise they can sort of have no image for a frame before their behaviors kick in. So that was just to cover that base. So that they're very data-driven enemies, but they all basically use the same. They're all just one actor. They've got one set of sort of functions, but they load in when they start up. They'll load in all that data from the tables, and they'll do things with it to set themselves up, and then they'll just do their behaviors. So they check their distance to the player. They'll constrain their speed, so they don't go too fast or whatever. There's rules about whether they can spot the player or not. This is the rule that checks, like, if I'm close to the player, then set my behavior to the thing in the table, based on the distance I am to the player. So they might choose what to do next, basically. Are they going to try to get closer to the player and do a melee attack, or are they going to run away and shoot from a distance, etc.? This is a rule about if they first spot you, they play a sound, or they can play a sound. They don't always, because it gets too repetitive. These are the actual behaviors. So by the time they've checked what their next behavior is, they basically, as long as they're not in kamikaze mode, which is really just something one of the zombies do, a bit like the Half-Life 2 zombies, they'll crack a grenade and just run at you really fast. If they're not doing that, which effectively that's going to be their last behavior, and we know that, so that's a special case. If they're not doing that, then they'll either be chasing, melee attacking, shooting, searching, moving to a different distance, or if they've lost sight of the player, they'll maybe play this lost them sort of sound, voice bite thing. Yeah, and then there's rules for flashing if they're getting hit, playing a hurt sound, which is sort of timed so it doesn't do it too often. They can spurt out blood particles. There's this kamikaze mode that happens to some zombies. And if they get stuck on something, because they basically just push towards the player, if they're running sidelong into something that's in their way, there's a timer that will have them just rotate to one side at random and go that way. So it just sort of jerks them around objects. And that actually works pretty well, and generally looks pretty naturalistic. So this was sort of some of my first AI stuff I've written, I guess, and I just wanted it to be good enough for a good action game where you can get in the flow, but you're kind of just blasting enemies, sort of like Serious Sam style or something. They don't have to be like brilliant. Yeah, so that's basically it for the monsters. What else have we got here? There's the car, which again is all just this one actor, but it reads in from a table and could be any number of vehicles. So this was one of the first tables I ever made. And there's not that many cars. There's a fair few, but not millions. So I think I only ended up using the orange one. So there's a sedan, there's a Kingsby, which is kind of like a Kingswood, cop car cruiser, there's a Stallion, which is kind of like a Mustang, there's a pickup, a bus, a Rover, which is kind of like a Jeep thing, there's a tank. Didn't end up using the turrets. There was actually just turrets that were like bunkers that you could go into that just had no vehicle speed, but they were otherwise like vehicles in that they could take damage and they shielded you when you're inside, and they had guns mounted on them though. They pretty much worked, but I can't remember quite why I didn't put them in. I think I left them out for some reason. Then there's these bonus cars, which I ended up just including in the base cars, I think. And then these are the classic cars. So there's this Grambo, which is kind of like a Lamborghini. Pluto, which is kind of just like a sports car. Hunters, like the Spy Hunter car. Z-Types, kind of like an E-Type Jag. The Drifters, this like that famous drift car, which I can't remember what it's called. And the Luxura, which is just this sort of vintage red sports car looking thing. And so they've got acceleration, top speed, braking, health, steering sort of amount, how big the car is, the image that it is. They have damage levels, so there's actually sort of 5 variants of each one, having them get more damage till they blow up and they smoke and have fire and stuff. These are some physics properties. This is how many seats there are, so how many survivors you can pick up. So the bus can fit like 40 survivors in it. And it's funny, I didn't actually end up with any missions where you have to rescue more than like 6 people or 8 people or something. I think would have been kind of cool if there was somewhere you had to rescue like 12 or 20 people or something. The bus would be quite good if you happen to have one. Be a good reason to hang on to the bus, because otherwise it's quite a slow, cumbersome car. There's some drag values for sort of doing sideways burnouty things. The price of the car I don't think comes into play. You couldn't buy cars in the end, you just scavenge them all. That's a default weapon, which isn't that relevant. Fuel capacity and how much it consumes fuel, so that was different for sports cars or heavy cars or sedans and tanks and things like that. Yeah, so that's the vehicles and how they work. I mean, that basically just reads them in here, and it's different, like, because there's lots of cars in a level, they will sometimes kind of be the player, but if you jump out of that car and get in another car, then it's not the player anymore. So this was sort of some early work I had to do for me personally to sort of be thinking a bit more object oriented about these different things and how to have, sometimes the player controls them, but they need persistent attributes that are contained inside themselves. If you jump out, like how much fuel's in the car, you know, you can put fuel in a car and then jump out and get in another car, and you don't, you know, your survivors can jump in a car, and then if you jump out, they jump out and follow you, and you get in another car, and you had to make that all work properly, which was some of the more troublesome stuff at times, but got it all working nicely. there's a bunch of stuff in here about falling into chasms. Like you have to jump over these chasms in some missions. You can fall in and die. Or you can also jump out of the car and let it go into the chasm and the car explodes in the chasm. Rules for it exploding and different damage states, and how to show the different flames and particle effects, and what to make the image for the car based on its row and how damaged it is. What it collides with, stuff like this. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Then there's the actual player, and the player's made up of... Where is the player? I'm making this up a bit as I go along because I haven't opened this for a while, but I wanted to make a video about it before I unsubscribe from Game Salad. So there's the player torso and the player's feet, and so basically it's two actors with the torso on top of the feet. They're a bit out of scale there. That's actually smaller and that's bigger. So the feet do some things and the torso does other things, because when you get in a car, the feet are hidden off screen and the player torso can become the weapon on the car, which there was a tank and this could be a turret for the tank, but I ended up getting rid of that. But you can still shoot a lot of your normal weapons while in the car, so this still acts as that actor, as the thing that shoots from here, but I make this invisible, so it's like you're shooting from inside the car out the windows. So let's have a bit of a look here. The feet control things. I think there's less in the feet. Oh, there's a bit in here, because that's to do with jumping in and out of the car and activating and deactivating the foot sort of art itself. That's about whether you're touching fire in the level and getting hurt and stuff. So if active equals 1, keeps you in the edges of the world, because sometimes you could jump out of a car and sort of end up outside the fence, and that would be a problem. So this handles moving the player around on foot, which can be done with keyboard and mouse or the touch pads on screen, the virtual D-pads. There's rules of what it can collide with. It also updates your visibility based on sort of if you're in the trees or not. You'll fade and become less visible to monsters, which is a good way to hide from them, and you can actually make quite long paths around some of the levels by sneaking through sets of trees, sets of interconnected sort of trees, depending on how the procedurally generated levels come out. You can jump in and out of the cars. You can be touching flame, and that makes a sizzling noise and whatnot. You can be touching an explosion, which also catches you on fire for a bit. What else have we got in here? The visibility and footstep sounds. So the torso has things like rotating to face where the player's touching on the screen, or where they're shooting by clicking and stuff. There's a few different ways to attack, but it'll make it face the point you're attacking. This controls changing the weapons by tapping the different weapon icons. Dying, the muzzle flash, reloading the gun, planting the bomb. You actually have missions where you detonate targets, and that controls planting of bombs. Chasms is falling in the chasm yourself as a human. Getting struck by lightning, which happens with the acid clouds. You've got to look out for them, but they also hurt baddies. They can damage your car as well. And getting hurt by enemy projectiles. So let's see, there's also the radio that plays lots and lots of different voice files based on the context in the level at the time. There's lots of pickups, there's ammo pickups, there's fuel and things in the game to pick up. There's the dynamic spawner, which flies across the level and drops off relevant enemies from the map. So the dynamic spawner flies across and drops off enemies, which is good because it keeps the level alive even if you've sort of cleared the area somewhat. And if you're hiding in trees, then it sort of gives you a bit of trouble because it'll often land sort of somewhere nearby where you have to account for it and sneak away again a bit. The demolition bomb. There's the fuel gauge. So let's take another look at the game and just have a bit more of a look at these things in action. And we could also have a bit of a look at the different tables.
For those citizens wishing to leave Earth permanently, the last rocket will
just before we go in, so you can switch that off. Okay, so there's the weapons table, which shows the different guns here. There's some down here that I didn't use. They're the turrets and things like that. So there's the pistol, shotgun, machine gun, rifle, missile launcher, flamethrower, and the fuel can is also used like a weapon because it's like it's a button that you can press on the side of the screen. So that also has info about the reload button and how many bullets to show out of the clip, and when you tap reload it sort of fills them up based on a bunch of this data. So I've been trying to be sort of as data driven as possible. There's the music table. Now, the music table is pretty simple, but it's basically a playlist system. So when the game starts, the playlist has 2 tracks in it, so it'll pick a random number between this column and just play that number track. So when you win a mission, there's 4 tracks that might play. When you fail a mission, it's always this one. The music's actually by Sage Lewis, who is a cool guy who got in touch with me after I'd released Rad Skater, I think. Maybe it was after Pulp Diction. And he wanted to, he was doing mobile game music and was interested in collaborating. So yeah, he made all the tracks for the game, and I love the tracks. They just, I never got sick of listening to them. They were fun every time I played. So that's Sage Lewis there. He's now gone on to keep doing really cool stuff. He scored a cool movie that I watched a little while ago. I can't remember what it's called now. It's got Martin Starr in it, I think. So yes, he composed Operator, the score for Operator, which was cool. It was actually a really fun movie. That's Sage there. So yeah, he did some really cool vintagey kind of synthy sounds and stuff. And also my mate Ryan Griffith did the really cool funky funk theme when you like finish a mission and it goes all waka waka waka. This game was inspired by Interstate 76, which I love the mood of, so it was cool to get that real funky track in there too. Prani did some voices and some art. Ben Weatherall did some art. Jim Bat gave me a lot of chit chat, feedback and thoughts and stuff as I was making it. And Brendan Barnett, of course, at Voice Unboxing did some really great voice work on it. Pretty bare bones option screen there, but hey, option screens aren't my thing. So let's have a look. So we're starting the game. Let's go into get a car. So these change if you're in desktop mode to show the relevant controls for keyboard and stuff. These screens are different if you're looking at the mobile tips. I tried to automate that stuff as much as possible with just by changing that one global attribute desktop version on off. It's running a bit slow here while I'm capturing, but there's the lightning clouds that can hurt you if you're under them. If you go in the bushes, you'll become less visible, but if you shoot, you become visible again and the monsters see you. Jump in a car, they get damaged by fire whether you're in them or not. Shooting up this guy, cleared the area. So there's the funky music by Ryan Griffith. So we've made some progress distance wise, 10 miles travelled, and we earned some sweet moolah. So yeah, each time you come back here, you can switch the radio back on and hear the voices. And yeah, these are, again, it randomly generates, well, procedurally generates a set of missions. So I thought I was really happy with how that came out. You have to sort of weigh up what's the best choice of a way to go based on a few different dimensions to each mission, based on my context. So I've got a car now, so these will go further. And now that I've got a car, there's these chasms missions appear. Let's do one of them. You have to jump over the chasms to make it, but they'll generally take you a long way because they're these kind of screaming racing missions as this acid storm follows you through the land like this. I was pretty happy with the car physics, considering that it's fairly basic. I mean, this jumping is sort of very Wile E. Coyote, silly cartoon style. But yeah, the way that the skidding works, the sideways friction, the burnouts are kind of cool. Yeah. Quite like these missions. There's a car shadow which I put in right near the end that I thought came out pretty well. So as you get into the later parts of the game, the monsters get to be the harder monsters, and there's more of them generally. There's all sorts of dimensions to the procedural mission generation that get ramped up. So the levels get bigger overall. The number of targets you have to hit for any of the given mission types is greater, so there's more, it's harder to do them. Oh, look at that. So this one pays well. This job pays well considering the risks. So this one, I think I double or triple the reward. Can't remember now. So this one's going to take us a long way. So let's do that one again. Oh, well, it's a bit boring. Let's just make it to zone 2, and then maybe we'll jump around a bit. So yeah, these bits are quite inspired by Interstate 76, just generally driving around, shooting stuff. The game was hypothetically kind of set in an alternate 1974 at one point, which I didn't really emphasize in the final game, but I like the idea that it's sort of a vintage setup, even though, but for all intents and purposes, it kind of would make sense if it was set in the future, I guess. Alternate future's kind of cool. Retro future. Okay, so these are, now it makes up a name that's procedurally generated as well. It sort of just mixes and matches two different names for each zone. Zone names, here we go. Let's have a look at some more tables. So zone names. Now what have I done here? Okay, yeah, so what it does is, if you're in zone 1, it'll choose one of these as a first part of the name, and then one of these as the second part of the name, etc. So if you're in zone 2, it's kind of deserty, so you're in the Bleeding Sands, or the Barren Drylands, or the Death Stone, or the Golden Canyons. And if you're in this sort of more toxic zone, you're in the Iron View, or the Legion Field, or the Violet Spectre, or the Ghostly Sinkhole. So yeah, there's sort of 6 zones, but they're actually kind of just 3 zones repeated, but these ones are harder. These are sort of horror sort of themed. These are kind of desert wasteland themed, and this is kind of like a toxic city theme. So that was kind of fun. There could obviously be lots more names, but I'm kind of happy with how they turn out. You just see them when you first make it over a zone border. It'll move across the zone title.
If you're all cashed up, go buy yourself a gun.
So the only other 2 tables of interest really are the missions table. Now this used to have tons and tons of missions in it, which I then got rid of and made it procedurally generated. So all it really does, these are just in there to define the size of the table, that's just jargon. But there's lots of attributes in here, so as you can see, these are all filled in procedurally by rules. It's about 200 or so as the level is generated based on zone parameters and things. So it'll generate 3 missions, and it'll give each one an they don't really have names, I guess. They'll have a type, which is like rescue, demolition, jumps, or clear the area. The goal text is pretty generic. That used to be all handcrafted, but so number of monsters to kill, survivors to save, targets to destroy. These are sort of basically one for each mission type. The reward. So these are all filled out procedurally. This is the music that'll play, but that's actually done with code. The size of the mission is procedural and gets bigger as the closer you get to the rocket. Monster types in the level, they're actually created from this table, which is the other one worth having a quick squiz at. This is the creature groups table. Now this is sort of more like a zone table. So there's basically, I didn't end up using that bit at the top, so let's come down a little. Zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's got a kind of a name, but it's just a debug name. These are basically the monsters defined numerically here that will appear if that's the row chosen. So it'll choose one of the 5 rows at random if you're in zone 1, and it'll then randomize between number of enemies available at once, like between the min and the max. If it's a spawn, if there's spawners in the level, it'll use this image to spawn these monsters. So there's an old shed which can have deers and zombies and spiders and stuff in it. There's also a barracks which can have like machine gunners and army dudes in it, as well as these other monsters. Spawn time, min max interval, backgrounds, so I'll choose a different background image, which are roughly the color of these highlights, based on the level, and they're not matched to the row. There's 4 variants, and it'll choose one at random. And for this zone there's 2, for this zone there's 3, and this is the randomization of the mission size, with a min and a max. A base of 4 plus 0 to 1, whereas this one, for example, by the end of the game, you've got a base of 4 with a randomization of plus 1 to 3 on the width and the height. And here you'll get like more monsters coming at you at once. There's 8 different variants in zone 6. It'll pick one and then fill out a bunch of stuff based on the row. Minimum, maximum, number of monsters, interval to spawn them at. The drone base will have drones and overlords and things coming out of them. The neon bunker will have like rambukas and wastelanders and stuff coming out, etc. So that defines the monsters coming out. Like when it goes to generate 3 different missions each time you come back to the map, it'll make 3 missions and be picking from these monsters. and the mission itself will store all its data here. When it comes back to the main menu, it effectively goes, makes all these up, and then reads those values to show them here. So that's one of the rows, that's one of the rows, that's one of the rows, and not everything about the mission is defined at this point. All the variables are defined, but until you actually go into the mission, look, this one's a shop. Let's go there. As the mission loads and we end up in the actual game scene, it then has a actor that zooms along, and it knows things already going in, like where the top and the bottom and the left and the right of the fences will be, but there's like a tree spawner that pops in, like a level builder actor basically, and it goes along in a grid from the bottom left. Basically like a level builder actor, an invisible actor, starts here and moves along, and it'll alternately sort of place above and below. That's the drop-off point for the survivors. We've only got to pick up one, that's pretty easy. It'll spawn these buildings in, and it'll spawn the trees in, and they're sort of related to one another somewhat. That's a neon bunker. So it'll go along in a kind of a grid, and then when it hits the fence it goes up a bit and then moves back to the left, and it'll place like these trees and then a building. It'll go along here, and there's a bit of an offset, so it's randomized, and then it hits the edge and it goes up a bit more, turns right and comes back this way, and it's placing buildings and trees based on the value. Let's get out. Oh, this is a sheep mission, so we've got one sheep. Oh, and that's it. That's all we need. So let's get out of here. You can go to the shop. You can click on reload whenever you want. You can also add fuel into your car anytime you want, like this. But you don't want to put too much in, because you might find that you want to. So the sheep has to sort of get near the pad, and then they'll get in there. You might find that, oh, here's a way better car, and then you sort of wish you didn't put so much fuel in the car that you left behind. So we're at a shop, and there's not much here, but based on that shops table, it sort of rolled a dice on which things appear in the shop, and it's just this ammo and fuel. Oh, I've got lots of money. We did that big jumps mission. Let's just buy everything. So now they're out of stock. That's where it shows the info about the shop items that are highlighted. You can buy stuff. So we want to get more distance. Oh, here's a demolition mission. That's good. This is the last type of mission that we haven't seen. So in this type, you plant explosives to blow up these like zombified buildings. In this case, they're sort of these infested hospitals. So we'll jump out, because you need to jump out to plant a bomb, and we're sort of stealthing, but I think they're going to find us, so let's run away. It's going to be hard to plant bombs while there's enemies spawning everywhere, so let's just take them out. Now we can probably sort of... No, we're going to have to take out more buildings. Quite like these missions because there's a bit more to it. It's like you've got to actually get cleared the area a bit. Hopefully we don't get burnt. Can't reload while you're planting a bomb. Now we've planted the bomb there, and it's going to tick, tick, tick and go off. That guy's seen me. Oh, there was only one to do. So as you go through in later missions, you might have to destroy like 3 or 4 demolition targets, which can get quite difficult when your health's ticking down and you're running out of pickups. One issue with the game, I guess, is it does take a while to heat up, so the start can maybe be a bit easy if you're good at the game. Would almost be good if there was a short, you could pick whether you want to play short, medium or long challenge, and whether you want it to be easy, medium or hard. So you could just do like a short, very hard mission or something, and then that would let you jump straight in and have a shorter game, because it is quite long. Alright, that's probably enough of that. I'm going to now load up a bunch of the old projects and just look through them, and I might do a sort of a time lapse, or I might just make a few comments on each one or something. Here we go.